Hey everybody, this is Bevin. Welcome to Bevin, a femme over 40 and her friends podcast. I'm your host, Bevin. I've said to my name 3 times. It's time to start the show. My co-host Biscuit Reynolds continues to join us in spirit. I do not know how long I will continue to announce him as my co-host, but perhaps forever. Because the bonds of pet connection are transcend the bodies that we get on Earth. I am so thrilled to welcome back my friend Dylan Hill on the podcast. Something I was very excited about actually when God called me to start a podcast again, because I had a podcast in the late aughts, early teens. Um, but when I was called to podcast again, it was definitely about sharing stories, both from my life, but also from my friends' lives. And I knew that the cool thing about people and time is that there would be people who came on my podcast who had changes in their lives. And like it'd be cool to interview people over the course of years. And another thing, too, that was really thrilling for me was that, I mean, this is a Scorpio moon moment, but like everyone is going to die. I've lost so many of my friends and loved ones that it's really extraordinary and so special to get to still be in friendship and life with people and to experience such a privilege to get older. We talk about that in this podcast, and it's such a privilege to get to witness that and the changes. And so I'm really excited for you to connect with Dylan now. And I invite you to join us in our previous episode. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So you can, just kind of witness both of our evolutions. Because, I think we're always transitioning in one way or another and kind of coming out in all these different ways. Because, it's like we're raised in mononormative cultures where there's just one way to be, right? One right way to be. And then every way that you're different is like a new way where you risk not belonging anymore. And we're in a new age where we can expose that fallacy easier and easier because of social media and the democratization of information, sharing through the internet, which is pretty extraordinary. And I'm really grateful to be alive in these times, as odd as that might say. the the things going on in the world are nuts, but we can deal with them, I believe. And that the way I process and deal with it is a lot about my faith. And I've talked about that on this podcast. And I'm excited about this episode with Dylan. Before we get started, I just want to share with you the best way to support this podcast is through my Patreon page, patreon.com/FKDP, which stands for Fat Kid Dance Party. Patreon is a site that allows creators like me to receive support from folks like you. It's safe and secure processing of your information, cancel anytime. And there's so much available there in my back catalog of what I've been providing for the last 5, almost 6 years. I've been producing on Patreon. I can draw a direct line to work I'm creating today because of the support I've received. And so if you've been a past, present, or future supporter of my Patreon, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for enabling me to continue to create this work, because it is so meaningful to me to follow the calls of my heart and to share all the different ways there are to be a happy, successful adult on my podcast. My blog is also a free resource supported by by my Patreon page. So queerfatfemme.com. I have been blabbermouth on the internet since 2008, chronicling what I call the relentless pursuit of my joy. So that's truly all I've ever been doing, is just trying to figure out how to be more myself and therefore more joyful, and experience the full breadth of human emotions. And I've grown so much. I don't know. It's so funny. There was a while where I was feeling really like ashamed about my blog. I want to say it was shame that came up, but just because I used to be such an idiot. You know what I mean? I have compassion for every version of myself, but also I recognize I probably said some stuff. But you know what? Whatever. I have compassion for everyone else so much because I'm able to continue to have compassion for myself. And I'm really proud of how diligent and continuous I've been in creating content, because it's simply from the part of me that believes that people need to see examples of other folks living authentically and with bravery in order to inspire themselves to do that. And I think the queer and decolonial ancestors, every time I teach my aerobics class, because they were the ones who showed me that being yourself is such a gift to everybody else. And I'm grateful for the people who were brave to do their thing. I never could have been a fat aerobics instructor if I hadn't had examples in my life of people just doing the thing. So there's lots of tiers of membership that include my aerobics classes. And I also have a tier of membership that includes my spiritual self-care lessons and various things I've learned as a seeker and a spiritual person. It's definitely interwoven into how I care for myself and how I show up every day. So I hope any of those resources are helpful to you. And you can also give a one-time gift if you don't want to be a member. And there's lots of ways to support. And I appreciate you showing up and listening. And, the three resources we all have are our time, treasure, and our talent. And so I'm grateful for your time. And I hope you enjoy this front porch conversation. Imagine that you're on a porch with me and Dylan with your favorite beverage and your coziest childhood blanket. I always think of it as white wicker furniture, but you can pick whatever kind of furniture you want. And I hope you enjoy the show. Dylan, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi. So
Oh,
good to see you.
it's so thrilling to be back with you. The last time you were on, I think was summer 2021. I
That's
want to
great.
say maybe
Honey,
so.
we were all locked in the house. We couldn't go anywhere.
Yes, it was deep quarantine. It might have been just summer 2020, but it was deep quarantine, and so much has changed. And I'm really excited. And yet, also, so much has stayed the same because you're still radiant from the inside out and a total diva, but with a little bit of a different self expression.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you're the fourth person on my podcast to have a pronoun change. So you are now she, her.
Mm-hmm.
Will you talk a little bit about, and this is also in your podcast, which will be in the show notes so people can go listen. But from now, because I think the last time that podcast episode dropped about a year ago, maybe a little longer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I had this moment where I realized a couple days ago that there's something about like July, August that's always creative energy for me. I look back and there's been so many moments in my life where there's been a lot of creative expression that's happened in these months. And I realized that my podcast, The Dylan Hill Show, launched this time last year. And so our episode, I think, was just like a couple weeks ago. Bev and I did a episode on my podcast last year that was talking about overcoming perfectionism. And I don't know if I've told you this, but since that has all come out, it used to be the second most listened to episode of my podcast. And as of this morning, because I checked, it's the number one listened to episode that I have.
Wow, even more than your transition.
I know that one's second now. Mm-hmm.
Oh, the top podcast I have, bar none, is my gay divorce episode number 2, which, like, I think I was episode number 2 of your podcast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's funny because I mean, I think people just tuned in for the tea.
We love that though. Well, I guess that's a good segue. Speaking of the tea, so it's interesting because when I was on your podcast for the first time, I was actually going through a lot of the process of accepting myself as a trans woman. But it was like a very silent process. It was something that I was still coming to terms with within myself, and I wasn't really speaking it into existence yet. I don't think I started fully speaking it to people until we had kind of come out of the lockdown. And, I was around just a handful of people. And I kind of started having that conversation. But you said it right I really have spent my life kind of transitioning. Even a family member told me when I sat her down and told her, this journey that I was starting, by starting my medical transition, she wasn't surprised. And I was like, really, you're not surprised? And she's like, well, I think that you have always been transforming and, over time. And what a metaphor for life, because I think we all are transforming in some way. Mine has just been a physical manifestation in a lot of ways because I've always been who I am on the inside. I was just wrestling with it. And this was all happening around the same time that I was reading a book by Martha Beck called The Way of Integrity.
Oh, shout out. That is a great book.
I love that book. And she talks about an integrity cleanse and how, to anyone who hasn't read the book. So to be in full integrity, we're not just talking about character or something like that about your personality. If you, I think the way she describes it in the book is if you think of a plane, if a plane is working in total integrity, it means that every part of that plane is functioning the way that it needs to so that the plane can take off, it can fly in the air, and then it can land safely. And so in doing an integrity cleanse, you get to the nitty gritty of like who you are on the inside. You're not even allowed to tell like the little white lies, like, oh, I liked this meal when I really didn't. And while I was doing that, the pandemic was a great time because we all had to get still. The Bible says, be still and know that I am God. And I think that carries so much weight for me because so much happens in stillness. People got still, and I think the voice of God started speaking to people. I believe that your intuition is, kind of what a lot of people believe the Holy Spirit is. It's that still small voice in you that says, you shouldn't still be in this marriage. You know that you're miserable in this job. And we saw a lot of that in the pandemic because people got still. So at the same time I was getting still, I was doing this integrity cleanse of like, I cannot lie to myself anymore. I will be a person that lives totally authentically, and I will be a person who is living in integrity. And I had been having this conversation with myself for about 6 years prior to this. I lost a friend about 7, almost 8 years ago, and she was young, and it was tragic and sudden. And I had this moment where it's like, oh my God, life could be over like that. Um, with no rhyme or reason, you can just, it's your time and it's over. And what I took away was I have got to live out my purpose to the fullest. I've got to be who I am, in this moment, no holds bar. And when I thought about, well, what is it that I'm not like telling the truth about? What am I not, being a full expression of? It had to do with my gender. And what would happen is I would think about it, and then it was so overwhelming. And I think a lot of it had to do with the religious dogma that I grew up in. I just couldn't accept myself as a trans woman. And even though at the time I was living as this very androgynous person who had been wearing makeup and dressing on more of the femme side since I was like 14 years old, there was this weird line in my head that goes, oh, but I will never cross this. I'll never grow my hair out, to my boobs like I have now. I'll never wear earrings. I'll paint my nails, but it'll never be pink or red, which is all I wear now. All of these things that I would deny myself. And what would happen is I would have the conversation, shove it away because I couldn't deal with it. So I say all that to say, when the pandemic hit and I had stillness and I was on this integrity cleanse, it was a truth that I could no longer deny about myself. And if anyone has listened to my podcast or wants to listen to it, it's dedicated to helping people tap into who they are authentically, because what happened in my life was the moment I told the rock gut truth about who I was and how I show up in the world and who it is that I want to be and who God made me to be, my life started to unfold. I figured out for me personally that living authentically was the key that unlocks the door to life. And so that's how I've gotten to this point.
I love that. And it's what's so beautiful about what you just said is that could apply to anything, not just a
Yeah.
gender. Like there's so many times in my life that I can look back now, and now that I have really worked hard on this internal sense of safety that I have, knowing that like as long as my relationship with God is tight, and I'm in my integrity, like everything's going to work out, and the people who aren't meant to be in my life will fall away. And I just did an episode a couple episodes ago about coming out, and like how it's not just about being queer or having like quote unquote identity that's like different than what we're taught in our upbringings is going to keep us safe. It's about just continually being who I'm meant to be and evolving, and like I just think there's, yeah, that line, I know I've definitely had those things in my head, those like little things my ego was trying to keep me safe with by saying like, well, as long as I never cross this line, like
Right.
I'm you know what, Dylan, I know this is going to be hard for you to hear, but like I'm wearing Crocs, like Croc shaped Crocs out in public now. And I feel like the Gen Z is giving me so much permission. Like I see like 25-year-olds running around wearing in that Croc life. And you know what? It's comfy and my feet need it. And I want to be an aerobics instructor and thrive for the rest of my life. And so like, like that like a choice. And plus, they make cuter Crocs now than ever before. But like, anyway, it was just like I had this line in my head, like, I will buy Crocs for the kitchen. Like this is 2014. I remember very clearly. I'm going to get a regular pair of Crocs for my kitchen use only. And now, 10 years later, life surprises you.
But that in itself, I think every generation is a living expression of, of something bigger and better that, will um, shift the energy, shift the mindset of the next generation. And I think whether I agree with the fashion choices or not, what it goes to show us,
Rubber stamp that.
what it goes to show us is that the inauthenticity that we can have sometimes because we've created those weird lines of like, I won't cross this, which really are just is a conditioning off the atmosphere that we grew up in. For me, it was a lot of religious dogma. And so the number one human fear is a loss of love. And so we've been conditioned to believe that if I do this thing that the tribe around me, the community around me doesn't agree with, I will be exiled, which means I will no longer experience, love. And so if Gen Z is teaching us anything, it's and if you want, for those people who subscribe to, Christian beliefs, if you want to make it biblical, the Bible says, come as you are. And Gen Z is being a living expression of showing up as you are. They're putting more of an emphasis on what does your inside look like rather than your outside.
Amen. Absolutely. I love it. It's like they're just not going to suffer the pageantry of professionalism. Like I think many of us just kind of went lockstep into. And I think there's something very powerful with being raised, because you and I think we're both raised before we really had constant internet, social media, like democratic access to being in public, right? And so
Mhm.
all we saw was like what white men in suits chose to put on TV, and like now, like when you are raised, like these Gen Z's like born after the year 2000, like they were raised with full internet, right? Like, so they know all the examples there are to be a happy, successful adult. They know it's not that, and so it's really fascinating to see what's possible for us. And like, I am definitely one of those people that's like, please let the youth lead us. Like, um, and I want to just win.
Yeah, and there's like they have an affinity. There's such an attraction with that generation towards the real and the authentic. And it's like, even like the musical artists that their generation is really loving and kind of like pushing up to the top of the charts are people that, aren't necessarily completely polished when it comes to outside appearance, have no problem talking about, their mental health battles in their life, the most authentic and raw writing of their music. And so they have completely, pushed aside this whole, colonize like perfectionism. Sometimes like I had a conversation with my boyfriend the other day, and because a lot of times he always feels like, oh, it's that like fundamentalism from like religious dogma. I said it's not just that, it's colonialization. It's the two colliding together. And I said there are so many people in the world that believe and behave a certain way and they can't even tell you why. There are people that would look at someone like me and think that I should not have basic human rights because I don't align with their religious beliefs, but they haven't even studied their religion enough to understand why they think it's bad. And it's like the amount of people that I've had conversations with when they're like, well, you grew up in the church, how do you reckon with, your transition and being a trans woman? And I'm like, I'm a soul. I am a spiritual being having a human experience. Anything that has to do with this body is part of the human experience. My soul does not have a gender. The Bible talks about that, when you die and go to heaven, like you won't look the way you look on earth, you won't have that name, you won't have that title. So who I am at my core, what God created is a soul, an energy that came to this earth school to have a life experience, and I believe this is the life experience that God chose for me to have. Why? I don't know. We'll have that conversation when I get back to where I came from. But I am a soul, and my soul doesn't have a gender. And it's like the amount of people I've had that conversation with, and you just see like the light bulb go off, and and what I realize is that they have realized they have never questioned the very thing that they choose to govern their life by. And I'm sorry, but for me personally, true faith is not living something because you're scared of it. You're living it because there's a conviction in you that knows wholeheartedly this is the truth. And I think there are a lot of people that don't wholeheartedly believe what they live, and they have no realization that there's a connection to colonialization because of that. These people came here and told you how you should behave. And you should believe this. Don't question why. You should just believe this. This is good. This is bad. It's like caveman mentality. This good, that bad.
Eating with like a fork and eating 3 times a day was also from colonization, to make a distinction from indigenous tribes who ate when their bodies told them to eat. I
Mm.
find that fascinating. It's like, and what's the most insidious thing about coloniality, and like the way it gets into your brain, is that you don't, it's invisible to you. It's just what everyone else is doing. And so we have this core need for belonging, which is a human need, and then they make our belonging hostage to our conformity to these like standards that are totally made up. And like, I think just the most liberating thing you can do is just ask yourself why. And like, I think you're totally right about faith. Like, faith is just belief in things unseen, but it's a conviction. It's like something that is so real, and it doesn't even have to be based in a belief in God. You can just have belief in things unseen. You can have a big dream on your heart, which I still think is, for me, I believe dreams are dropped in your heart by God, but like, you don't have to believe what I believe to have faith that there's something more for your life, a thing you can't see now in the material. This is something, Marianne, we're going to talk about A Course in Miracles. Marianne Williamson taught with A Course in Miracles that like, you want to be like Cinderella, and instead of seeing the pumpkin, you want to see the coach, right? Like, you want to see something that is coming and not focus so much on the material world, because that's how we cycle into anxiety and depression, because we're so focused on like what is versus what the vision is. And that's how everything great was created by somebody who had a vision for something else, like someone came up with couch,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because the, brand of religion that I grew up in, I was taught that everything that brought me joy was of the devil. And so it taught me that I cannot trust myself, that I can't trust my intuition. And I remember saying to a family member at one point when I said, I really believe that intuition is, sort of what the Bible talks about with the Holy Spirit. It's that part of you that's connected to God. And she's like, no, I don't think that's intuition. And she was saying, you know, that's just something that you have that like when your fight or flight kicks in. And I was like, no, that's instinct.
Thanks. Yeah. Intuition.
Instinct.
Prayer is how we talk to God. Intuition is how God talks to us. Instinct
Correct.
is just how our bodies are wired. And like, when we go through sorry to interrupt you, but when we go
No.
through trauma, it rewires us so that like the defense mechanisms, the things that come in, like I went through a really dramatic and big thing that, I'm not going to talk about what happened, but like it was like, I can see now the shame response, but I couldn't even identify it as a shame response because I was in such fight or flight about like what was going on. And like, it was just, I can see it so clearly now, but I couldn't at the time. And that's like, that's our wiring, right? And so it's just a lot of therapy, a lot of work. All my healing modalities come together now, and I have this very soothed nervous system, and I can go through things and it doesn't hijack my nervous system. And when it does, I can come right back into my regulation. But that's practice and healing and removing a lot of distractions and living in the forest.
Well, I think that truly tapping into who you authentically are is just you returning back to yourself. Because a lot of, the healing work that I'm having to do in my own life, with my therapist, a lot of it has been that teaching myself that what brings me joy, what I am naturally drawn to, what I am intuitively drawn to, it is the authentic me. But I grew up in a dogma that taught me anything that I brought me joy that I felt naturally inclined to was of the devil because it didn't serve their needs. It didn't serve their benefit. And so I've spent a lot of time unlearning those things. And I that in itself messes with your hardwiring because it teaches you to not trust yourself. It teaches you that you can't trust you. And what I had to learn was that I don't think you can truly have faith in God if you don't have faith in you, because you are an expression of God, which is another thing that my church didn't want to teach me. And I always struggled with this whole, how can you tell me that I am made in the image of God who is perfect? I'm an expression of that, but I'm also born wretched and in sin, and I need someone outside of myself to save me. It wasn't adding up for me.
The incongruence is so real. And like I just talked to a woman yesterday who grew up with a preacher dad and really watched the distinction between how he was at home, which was quote not nice, and like how he was in the church. And like she decided but she always knew she had a tight relationship with God. And I think it's incredible when people can grow up in religious fundamentalism and incongruence, and instead of like giving away their faith, they tuck in closer to God. And so she read the Bible
Mhm.
twice, and she was like, "Yeah, I see the word, and I see the behavior, and I'm gonna focus on the word," And like, I think that's a really brilliant and bold way to live, is to still maintain your connection and relationship with God, even when you've been religiously traumatized, which I think many, many people have been. Um, you were raised Pentecostal.
Yes. So I started out before my grandmother passed away. I grew up in the Baptist church, but I always tell people at that time of my life that was very performative because how my church involvement really started as a young child was because I right after I got taken away from my mom by the state and went to live with my grandmother put me in a church Christmas play to give me something else to focus on, and I had maybe like two speaking lines in the whole play. And one day during rehearsal, I was off in the corner singing because that was music and singing was always how I self-soothed when I was being locked in a bedroom by my mom. And so somebody was like, "Oh, you can sing?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know that I can, but I do, and I enjoy it." And so I got a church solo in this like little Christmas play. So then that launched me singing in all the churches in my home county and stuff like that. So those early years in the Baptist church was really just an opportunity for me to be on stage and perform and be connected to people. I got, once I had that feeling, it was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be in front of people. And as I've gotten older, it's like I still believe and know that there's a calling on my life to be, you know, in this realm on to have this platform in the public eye, but it's I always say God took me from being an entertainer to an entertainer. um and so I'm still like figuring out that process, but I digress. I started out in the Baptist church, and then about my grandmother passed away, and at 13 my godmother got me involved in the Pentecostal Church of God, and that's when it was a double-edged sword. It was when I really understood a true connection to God. And I said this to my boyfriend the other day. I said, you know, I'm thankful for that experience because they did believe in spirit. They did believe in a spiritual connection. Um, I think they learned to manipulate some of those experiences for their own benefit, but I did know and experience God in a real way. I just had to unlearn some of the understanding that I had around it, which is why now, I tell people I have a very strong relationship with the God of my understanding.
Mm.
Um, and so that faith, that Pentecostal Church of God faith was very strict and dogmatic.
It's interesting how like it kind of doesn't matter the denomination, it's just the culture, and like some cultures, can be really obnoxious and some can be really like open and truly accepting and like it's I'm grateful that you've leaned so much into your faith, and I'd love to talk to you more about something we've talked about personally as friends, which was like when you were raised. So in Pentecostal traditions, what I understand is there's the speaking in tongues, and I've been to a few Pentecostal services, but nobody spoke in tongues, and so I missed that part. But so there's you had experience with that growing up, and then it's kind of reappeared now that you've been doing your spiritual deep dive and coming more into your integrity. And I think there is like an interesting um coalescing, that's not the word I want, but it's like a synchronicity, a parallel with you transitioning, coming out, and transitioning gender. And again, just life is transitioning, life, we're all
Right.
changing, but then suddenly like you had a connection to God that got deeper and deeper and deeper because I think you were stepping more into your truth. So will you talk a little bit about that, like what was happening in the Pentecostal services and then how that's coming through today?
Yeah. So, growing up as a young teenager in the Pentecostal church, I very much, because I was still trying to deny at the time what I thought was just sexuality, I thought I was just this highly effeminate little gay boy. That was my focus. And I was trying to escape that. So the church's response was, solely focus on God, eat, sleep, breathe God, and deny yourself that will stop existing. God will deliver you from that because you're being so faithful and doing his work. And so, I mean, I was all in. I was
I just
fasting,
want to say they call this pray the gay away.
pray the gay away. Yes. I hate to break it to you. You can't pray it away.
You
It's
can't. It is, you know what? Being gay is really fun. It's way better than being straight. So, like, I don't know.
well, and it's which, I'll get back to what your question was, but just a side note, there was a moment in time where I moved away at 18 and I had moved here to Tennessee and to start this new life. And I was living in a hotel and I remember I had gotten kicked out of my home church at this point because of my sin. And I remember I woke up one day and so clearly heard the voice of God say, I made you as you are. And if I want you to change, I will change you and I will let you know.
Mhm.
And it was in such a way that I couldn't deny it. I wasn't drinking, I wasn't on drugs. Like I had just woken up. It was crystal clear. And of course, it still took me many years to accept that as truth. And I questioned, was that my own voice? Was that my own thoughts? Um, but that was a shift in my life where I went, okay, there's two people in this life or two energies in this life. Yes, honey, there are balloons coming. We're on Zoom and I just made the balloon. Honey, God's celebrating. And
Yes.
there were two people or energies in life that I had to run things by, that I had to be concerned with, what they thought. And that was God and myself. And as long as I had confirmation that I could live with myself and I could, get that clearance from God with my spiritual practice, I was good. And what everyone else thought didn't matter. But to answer the question that you actually asked, I was so like the reason why I set that up that way of letting you know I was all in is because I truly think that when you're all in with something, you let down all the walls, and whatever that thing is can truly use you.
Mm.
And for me, letting all those walls down and completely being used by God is exactly what happened. And I created a authentic prayer life. I had a true relationship with God. And the Pentecostal church believes in the gifts of the Spirit. And that's the gift of tongues is one of them, the gift of discernment. So a lot of times growing up in our church, a person would start speaking in tongues, giving a message to the congregation, and then someone who has the gift of discernment would interpret that. Um, and
I'm just gonna say Shamala Hamala.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where like the congregation kind of had to have discernment because some people you were just like, oh, is it the third Sunday of the month? Oh, Nancy so and so is going to be speaking in tongues today. Um, and it's like I don't want to make fun or be disrespectful because there were moments in that were authentic and were real. And I do believe that, the Bible says if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. And I think that if your heart and your intention is truly pure, God can speak to you in whatever way is possible. Um,
Amen. You don't have to speak in tongues to speak, like to be a channel, right? Like it's really more about getting yourself out of the way, the ego out of the way. Like you said, dropping all your walls and just because God
right.
can do more with your surrender than with your control.
Right. And so, because I was so desperate to be delivered and be right in the eyes of God, I mean, I had surrendered it all because I needed it to be changed. Because, that part of me was fearful that I was doing wrong. And so, because of letting those walls down and truly letting God use me, it got to where when I would pray over people, I would intuitively know things about people, or I would start praying for things over them that I felt just led to pray about. And even as I was praying, I'd be like, this is weird. Why am I saying this? Why am I praying this? And then the person, like the prayer would be over after service, these people would approach me and be like, I haven't told anyone this situation in my life, and you just started like speaking it. And in that faith, my pastor's wife said, oh, your spiritual gift, your fruit of the spirit is that you have the gift of knowing. And so I grew up like, basically what the secular world would call a psychic ability. In the church, it was a spiritual gift of knowing, where I would download these, messages, this knowing, these understanding of things about people and situations from God, and then speak it forth. And it would happen all the time. And it got to the point where I was like 14, 15 years old, and people in the church would ask for me to pray over them to see if, God would give me anything. And so once I got about 18 and I like got kicked out of the church, so I don't know if I just, something inside of me consciously just like shut that down and was just like, okay, I don't do that anymore. Um, as I look back on it, I've still always had this super strong intuition, and it would be this weird thing where I could be talking to somebody like, "How'd you know that?" And I'm like, "I don't know," but it wasn't consciously in my mind that I still had that gifting. But around the same time that I acknowledged myself as a trans woman and started living authentically in that, really unlearning a lot of the religious dogma that had become a barrier to my spirituality, to my connection to the divine, that psychic ability, that spiritual gift of knowing just kept getting stronger and stronger. And it was getting to the point where, it was almost like borderline mediumship where I could, I have a hard time defining it because, I don't feel like I'm talking to ghost. People are energy. And that even after we pass, that energy is out there. And if you can connect to energy, then that's where the message is coming from. So I always like to say, God is downloading this information as I'm connecting to that energy. Um, and so as time has gone on in my transition, this ability has just gotten stronger and stronger. And I was actually telling you before we started this interview that it's even getting to the point now where like I can see like shadows or blurbs like pass by, which is a little freaky sometimes because as a kid, I remember like praying like I just don't want to see people. I don't want to see things.
I
Which is interesting.
I too had that prayer. I was like, no ghosts, thanks. I
But
didn't
see,
know.
what's
I didn't even know that I had any kind of psychic awareness. I just straight up was like, no ghosts. And I went to a haunted Girl Scout camp for many years. So like, and other kids would see ghosts, no ghosts for Bevan. And they protected me. Like I never interacted with ghosts, and I feel great about that. But I too have been having more clairvoyance and seeing things more.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I was the same time I was 13, right after my grandmother died, she visited me in a dream. And she was standing at the kitchen table in her nightgown, but I consciously knew in the dream that she had just died. And I was like panicking and I was like, "What are you doing here? Like you're dead." And she was like, "I'm just checking on you to make sure that you're okay." And I was like, "I'm fine. I'm fine. You can go wherever you need to go." And so I woke up and that was through a dream. But then about 2 months later, um, those that have listened to my podcast or that know anything about me know from like 14 to now, I've been living on my own. So I was living in my childhood home by myself. And I was sitting in the living room one night and I saw her walk out of her bedroom and into the living room. And I jumped up off the couch. I thought I'd lost my mind. Um, so that was the last time I really like saw anything. And then here recently, I was on a hike with someone and I saw an older man walk by with an older woman. And then when I looked back, the man was by himself. And I looked at the person I was with and I said, "Where did the woman go?" And he's like, "There wasn't a woman with him." And then I started downloading what I assumed to be this man's wife and like her name. And the person that I was with, I had never told that I have like this connection to any of that. And so I panicked and I was like, "Let's go this way." And the person I was with was like, "Well, we just came from that way." And I'm like, "Well, let's just go back." Because I knew if I went the direction where that man was, there was getting ready to be, a message of some sorts. And I just, I still have a moment with that part of my gifting where I get super, super nervous. That people are going to think I'm more nuts than they probably already think. Um, it's just like, dear God, you're a trans woman. Um, you grew up in this like crazy like fundamentalist church, and now you're saying you like can talk to dead people, and like you're like, who are you, Miss Cleo? Call me now. And so it's like, I don't know. There's just like this nervousness to me that's like, I don't, my God, is there something else I need to tell people about myself so they can look at me and be like, this girl is weird?
I mean, here's the thing is you're also incredibly beautiful. So I think the way people stare at you is more mesmerized than anything else. But it's interesting. There's a Our Lady J, who's a trans woman performer. She said this beautiful thing. She's also a writer. She writes a lot of TV shows. Um,
Mm.
she said this beautiful thing that like changed my life like 15 years ago. And she said, like, when people are staring at you, consider that they're just thinking about how beautiful you are, because like it's, first of all, it's just an easier thought to have, and why not have thoughts that are uplifting, right? But like also it's kind of true, because like when I stare at someone, it's usually because they're just mesmerizing, and like and I mostly mind my business. I also want to talk about the timing of you adopting Willow, because you rescued a beautiful cat who is right over here over your shoulder, cleaning herself and settling down as we conversate. When did you get Willow, and did it coalesce with like an amplification of your gifts?
Yeah, because it was all the same timing. I actually, at the same time I was processing my gender identity, I had just moved into the condo that I'm in now. And then so for years, I had been, when I wasn't living here in Tennessee, I would be living in my childhood home in North Carolina that my step grandfather still occupied in his old age. And he would never let me have a cat. Even at the point where I owned the house and he was just living there. It was this whole big thing. So when I moved into this space, I was like, oh my God, I can do whatever the hell I want to, and I'm gonna get a cat. And so, yes, all of that happened in the same season of life. I got Willow, I moved into this space. I was, you know, really becoming my authentic self. And then, these abilities were getting stronger and stronger.
I love it. Cats are such an incredible, like cats and dogs have different energetic things they can do for us. And like, in the witchy circles, they talk about your familiar, but it's
Mm.
basically just an animal who helps you process your energy. And so, and cats purr, and it's a different vibration, and it's a very healing vibration than what dogs can do for you. But like, I think when you want to level up, and if you're working on this stuff, like having your own familiar. You know what I mean? Like if you have two people in a house, it's probably a 1-to-1 ratio of pets. And I just want to offer lesbian pet math, which is, I do not think it's crazy. I had to do this is one of those lines in my head. But like I think that a 2-to-1 adult to cat or dog ratio is a totally normal amount of pets, and then one pet for every child. So anyway, be that as it may, I just want to influence people to connect to their intuition and to rescue pets. And so
Boy, if you're somebody with multiple personalities, you're screwed. You are going to be a cat lady for sure.
huh? I love it. And also sometimes people with multiple personalities, it's because I had a friend who dealt with that, and it turned out she was just incredibly psychic and just like
Yes.
incredibly abused. And like once they did a lot of the healing, pronoun transition, but once they did a lot of healing, they really everything came together so beautifully. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's very interesting. Like, I mean, obviously, like mental health stuff is all which ways, but it's really cool to watch people in their healing journeys and like what's possible. And
Yeah, it's funny though that you bring up the like the cats and like the synchronicity of like Willow coming in my life because privately we've talked recently. We were talking about everything that like the shift that's happening in the atmosphere right now. And at the same time that we both kind of been feeling this like energetic shift and like things like that, Willow has suddenly went from sleeping at the foot of my bed to sleeping on my pillow by my head every single night. And it's like this routine where if I can lay down and be on the pillow, but if my bedside lamp is still on, she doesn't come up. The moment I click that light off, she jumps on the bed, she goes around me, and she lays down.
you're her job, and she knows what to do. Biscuit Reynolds did this towards the end of his life, probably about the last year or so. I noticed that like because he would sleep where he wanted, but he would come up every night. Maybe the last couple of years, I don't know. The last 5 years are a blur, but he would come up at bedtime, and it's just such a when you're dealing with pet loss, like going to bed, like it's just so lonely and sad, and like he would come up to bed with me, and he would lay like because I would lay there for a minute. I might be on my phone or something like that, but he would like pick a chakra that he needed to lay on. And I realized I was like, he's always laying on a chakra. And like when he would try to do like third eye or crown, I would say no. Like, please do not lay on my face. Like, but he would try. And like, but like a lot of times it'd be like a throat chakra moment where he'd lay on my neck or on my chest, like, and like, or right here on the solar plexus, like very interesting. Like, and he would do a lot of root chakra work, I think, during the day when I would sit on the recliner because he'd be sitting on my lap.
Mm.
But this little man, I was his whole job. Like handling my energy was his whole job. And like I realized now, like in my grieving process, like what an emotional load he was carrying for me. And like now it's like, God, it's I said this foolish thing the other day on Instagram stories, like where I was like, now I feel like I'm on the beach, but like God is carrying me because like I just have to see how much my spirit team can handle for me because I don't have my cat, or my dog, and like I think every pet loss is like accumulative, it's like it all comes rushing back and it's so present. And anyway, cats are amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting like talking about like that your animal like its purpose is like helping you with that energy because my boyfriend is here a lot and it's like he desperately wants Willow to like come and like lay on him. And she has this routine. She comes over and she wants like a good morning, like pet and acknowledgement. And then it's immediate, goes to my side of the bed and lays down beside me. She doesn't typically lay on me. She does this thing where she wants to come up to my leg and she wants half of her body to like be on my leg while I read or, I'm on my phone and stuff like that. And it's interesting because I can he can be in the other room and she can decide to come into the living room and say hello. But the moment she hears me, it's boom, leaving him comes to me. So it's funny how they know.
Oh, it's really interesting. I can't believe there was a time in my life where I mean, it's just colonization, coloniality, like that I didn't believe that pets were sentient and plants were sentient, and like that everything around us has energy, and like the imprint of the trees that made the wood behind me isn't still energetically here, right? Like it's so fascinating how we're really just brainwashed to feel very alone and individual and somehow superior to things around us when in fact everything is working together for our good.
Well,
Um,
and that all of the things that we are intuitively guided to do, and even sometimes instinctively, meant to do, is trained out of us. And then those of us who return back to that, who really do the work of becoming authentic and returning back to self, the rest of society thinks that we're the crazy ones. And I'm like, I'm crazy because I'm doing what I am naturally guided to do, what I was made to do. Like, I don't know when you're going to wake up and, realize that you're just working the system that was created for you.
Yes, and it's a no-win system, and you're crazy. Like, I think they're the crazy ones. Like, there's a prophecy about the age of Aquarius that said a third of people will die, check. A third of people will go mad, check, and a third of people will ascend, check. And I think the people who are going mad, these are the people who are like really stuck in the ways that it's always been. And you can see it on the roads too. I just think people are, I mean, just drive slow and careful. Give yourself lots of time, everybody. And then the people who are ascending, like those are those of us who are like tired a lot this year, who are like, I know people who are like perpetually sick because they just, their bodies are getting forced to rest, right? And so like having us, I think, vibrate up and like to do something greater and bigger in our lives and have our intuitive faculties coming online because like people teach on the clairs, so like clairvoyance is like seeing things. Claircognizance is that knowing. There's like there's a bunch of clairs. But like I think anyone who identifies as like an empath, like meaning you're feeling other people's feelings, that's a form of a clair. I forget which one that is, but like it's just
That clairsentient,
clairsentient.
maybe. Yeah.
I think clairsentient is the smell one, but whatever. Anyway,
Okay.
you could Google it, but all that to say, like, I think we're coming online and there's this bottom dwelling brittle star that lives in the bottom of the sea. And like, I just saw a video about it where like every one of their cells in their body is essentially refracting light. So it's like the whole thing is like an eyeball. Uh,
Mm.
and so I think like what's happening is like our cells are transforming. I mean, this is me just really having a theory. I don't know, but like I think our cells are transforming to refract higher light and to like be and to have a higher knowing. And so those of us who are ascending, and you know it if you are, right? And if you don't know it and you're listening to this podcast, like I think you suspect. But like
Or God may be trying to tell you something.
yeah, exactly. So drink your water, because like your body is changing, right? Like it's, you may look similar, but like you're not, you're shining different, and like that requires a lot of rest. So like 2024, it's just a year of resting. Trying to do the best I can with what I have and then just focus on priorities. Um, but Dylan, do you think that you're at a point where you're ready to see clients, like people who are like willing to let you continue to practice with them?
Yeah, it's interesting because you and I talk about this a lot, and we're talking the other day about I believe it was Tyler Henry and
Yeah.
how for him,
Also,
like,
I also told you to read his book.
yes, you did. And I plan to. It's just anyone who knows me, like if I was to move this pillow that's behind me, there's a stack of books up there. There's three stacks of books here. We won't even talk about the books that I have to use as decoration in the living room because they're just everywhere. And so it's like I have to work it in. And right now I'm in a season where I'm reading a lot of like spiritual material that's like educational right now. And because I feel like I'm leveling up. And so I'm like I will add it to the list.
Yeah.
But I bring that up because I think you said that as he was like kind of um growing that muscle in him and sharpening those skills, he was just having to, sit down and read people. And so I have thought about that, and sometimes I do think the only way for me to really fine tune this is to just do it. So I'll put this out there. If someone feels led or guided to want to have that moment with me, you can go to my Instagram, _Dylan Hill, and I have a link tree where I promise you, if you try hard enough, you can get a hold of me.
You can DM.
Yeah.
Yeah, easy. Please do. If you feel called, please get Dylan to practice on you because I think sometimes it's funny because I think I would put Brandy Carlisle's memoir ahead of Tyler Henry, even though I have recommended both of those in this time we've been on Zoom together. But Brandy's memoir, she talks about getting baptized and getting turned away from the Baptists because the Baptists are quote mean. So I just think, as a showbiz person, I just think you'd really like appreciate that memoir too.
It's so funny that you're bringing up like baptizing and all of that because so I have her book and I've her book is one of those books that when I need a break from like all the serious stuff that I'm reading, I have a couple books that I kind of will pick up and it's just kind of like a palate cleanse for me because I'm still learning. Reading for me has never really been about escaping into fantasy. It's been more about like receiving information. So I do have her book, but um being baptized, I was saying to someone the other day that, it's interesting when I got saved in the church and when I got baptized, I really didn't have a full understanding of what that symbolically meant. And now I'm at a place in my life where I feel like I could truly get baptized again because I've shed so much, that whole like symbolism of like you go down and when you come back up, you're risen and you're a new and it's a new version of yourself. And so I feel like now I have a better grasp on what that really means, what that really symbolizes. And I was saying how it's interesting how they push a lot of like salvation and baptizing on the younger generation at a point in time in their life where they really don't understand what it means, what it truly symbolizes. And so it was just a conversation that I was having that, I think it's not until we really get older, get some life experience, truly have a daily spiritual practice and connect to that energy that I call God, that you really can understand you know, what you're saying, what you're doing, and what it really means.
Amen. I have to say, part of my spiritual hygiene practice is salt baths and taking salt baths and getting
I
into
know I got that from you.
yes. And what I have added to this practice is if I do a whole head dunk, which is rare because, she's color treated, doesn't like salt. But when I do a head dunk, which I usually do at least once a year in the actual ocean, on a new moon, usually, and usually on the Leo new moon, because that's the great time to be in the ocean.
Mm.
Uh, on this hemisphere because it's summertime. But I will go under, and I've done this in the shower too, because in the shower I just use salt counterclockwise on my heart. But like I'll just set the intention: I'm new today. I am new and fresh, and here as your tool, and like make me fresh, release everything else. Like here we are, and like because we wake up with like thousands of new neurons. We wake up with thousands of new cells every day. So like we're constantly evolving. We're constantly becoming a new version of ourselves and it's very affected by how we think. And so if I bother to think, even just think whether I believe or not, but just think that I'm new today, use me. Like I think that is so fresh and it's like a rededication and I just don't think that you can dedicate yourself enough to service to whatever that higher power of your understanding is enough. Like
Yeah,
they
I mean, and it goes back to that whole, life being a transformation in and of itself, constantly shedding what's no longer you.
mhm, absolutely. Okay, speaking of shedding what's no longer you, let's talk hard right turn into the transition from black hair to red hair.
Yeah. I think one of the things I love about you is like how deep we can get and spiritual and woo-woo, as some people would call it. And then we could be like, so tell me about your hair care routine. Um, So at the same time I changed my hair color, again, this was all during the process of acknowledging my transition. And I knew I wanted to grow my hair out. And I had had jet black hair for a decade. And I don't know if is this gonna be video? Will people be able to see this?
Yep.
Okay. So you'll see that I am like Snow White. Like if I stood in front of a white wall, I would disappear. And I love that, I always like say like if I had been a drag queen, I would have been like porcelain doll or something would have been my name because I love looking like porcelain, even though I got picked on all the time as a kid because everyone else in my family was like trying to get as dark as they could. And so I loved the extreme of having that really like blue black hair on my like pale white skin. And at the same time, it got to where there were people in my life that every time I would question changing my hair color, they'd be like, well, this is your signature color. Like, you've made this like your hair color. It's a part of your signature look and all of that. And I thought, if I'm at a place in my life where I'm truly embracing who I am authentically, I am shedding what is no longer me. I felt like the hair color was attached to that. Um, and I've always loved shades of red. And of course, in this lighting, it looks really dark. But if I'm like lean back, you can see some of the redness in my hair. So it's like this burgundy red color, but it's also kind of a nod to when I did my ancestral DNA, I learned that I'm like Irish, Scottish, Welsh. And so a lot of like redheads in my family line. And so again, it was just almost like a return back to self. Um, Obviously I chose to do more of like a fashion like glam color red because I'm that diva part of me is just going to always be there. And again, I like extremes and I don't want to be boring. Um, so the main changing of the hair color was just again a shedding of what was no longer me. And I thought, well, if I'm going into my life a truer, more authentic version, then I want to do something symbolic of that. And the hair was that.
I love that. I knew
And
you'd.
now my hairdresser says I can never go back. She's like, I will never take you jet black. She's like, you're a redhead now.
Yes, you are a redhead now. I love it. It's like, and I love the Irish, Scottish, Welsh background too. Maybe we're related. It's yeah, there's something to that too. Like there's a lot of redheads in my line, and I keep this like little weft of red under my hair.
Mhm.
It just never feels right for me to walk fully away from it, even though I do love being blonde. I wish
I
my
was always jealous of people who were blonde. I always wanted to be blonde so bad. And I was for like a very like short span of time when I was like 16 and it just wasn't a good look. I just
yeah.
it just wasn't a good look. And I was like, I'm not meant to be blonde. I'm meant to be a redhead. Because even my natural hair color is like a reddish brown.
Mine too, actually. Like when I was little, it would be like blonde in the summer because it would get blonde streaks, and then it would be auburn in the fall, and then more brownish in the winter, and then just go through that cycle. And then when I started really caring for my hair, it just got really brown, and I was like, let me just. I went red for a really long time, and then I just the blonde. I started with blonde streaks like ginger spice, and then it just crept all over.
Well, as I'm getting older, I'm having strands of gray, which I don't love. But I said to someone one day I was complaining about all these like specks of gray that I have in my natural hair, and they looked at me and they were like, "Well, to be fair, you lived through a lot as a child, and so you are a lot older, energetically, mentally, emotionally than you are." Your realistic age. And so I was like, that makes sense. So I've decided to be a little bit kinder and fairer to myself. And I'm like, there's a reason why I have these gray hairs, but it's okay because every 8 weeks I go and get them covered up. So
I firmly believe that a witch isn't in her full power until she's fully white hair. And so I think that that has really changed how I perceive my little gray buddies coming through because I'm like, oh, this is just me continuing to develop, and I know how much I'm developing. So
yeah.
I still have a long way to go. So if you're, I mean, growing old is a privilege, like as you know, like,
Yes.
losing friends so young, like it changes you, and like in many ways, like of course,
I'm fine with getting old. I just don't want to look it.
no, exactly. And there's a difference between getting older and aging, and like I think we can really care for ourselves in a way that like, and especially living in your authenticity is a great way to care for yourself. But of course, there is skincare too. Um, Okay, Dylan, let's go back to the deep end.
Sure.
We're both deep into A Course in Miracles. I'm doing it for the fourth time, but have never finished it. And so you were also diving in, and we both did it because there were people we admired who had walked through A Course in Miracles. And I wanted to ask you about your takeaways, and I believe you are ready.
Yeah, so I first heard about A Course in Miracles probably 4 or 5 years ago. I am I want to say an admirer. I have so much respect and reverence for the spiritual teacher, Reverend Dr. Ian Van Zant. And she talks about A Course in Miracles a lot. And it was one of those things where I was like, she said that she truly understood God and her connection to the divine when she started studying things like A Course in Miracles, Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes, This Thing Called You by Ernest Holmes, Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And so I bought all of those books and thought, well, I'll read them out and see if intuitively I feel a connection. And the thing with A Course in Miracles is, if for anyone who's ever tried to dive into it, it's a lot. It's many, 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 many pages, because you have like the actual book part information itself, then you have the workbook, and then you also have the manual in the back for those that want to learn how to teach the principles of A Course in Miracles. But what I love about it is that, well, let me go back. So I first picked it up and it wasn't clicking with me. It was so overwhelming, and I was like, it was like reading the Bible, this fine print with all of these pages. And so I, like you, kept going back and forth. And then here recently, I just, we keep talking about this shift in the atmosphere. And I think I just felt led and directed to go back to it. And so I'm, I'm doing the workbook right now. And then, depending on what the principle or the lesson is for that day, I go back and look at the text and kind of compare it. But so I started that again. You just felt guided to that. But what I love about it is the course talks about how it's not really it doesn't subscribe to any like brand of religion, and it's not a religion in itself, but it does use traditional Christian language. And I think what I love about it is it was the first time that the Bible really started making more sense to me. Um, because it kind of it uses Christian language because it interprets the Bible in a metaphysical way. Versus a literal translation, which is where I think sometimes people get misguided in religious dogma, is because we take things literal. I think the Bible was meant to be interpreted metaphysically. And so I look at it as like a spiritual, like a psycho-spiritual text, if that makes sense, because it is a training of the mind. But the principles in it are also spiritual principles. And so reading it, God started making more sense. Jesus started making more sense. Certain things in the Bible started clicking for me. And then I started looking into Marianne Williamson, who is a student and really a teacher of the principles of A Course in Miracles. And she just recently put out a book called The Mystic Jesus, which talks about the metaphysical interpretation of the mystic Jesus. And that has just really blown my mind.
I've been using her reading of the workbook for A Course in Miracles, because my first try, I didn't even use the workbook. I was just using the regular Course in Miracles. And it's just like one line, and it'll be just like, I mean, like yesterday's line was like, um, God speaks to me wherever I go, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
and I vibe with it, but then the workbook gives you things to do. And something Marianne talks, because then so Marianne will read the word for the, or the line for the day, and then read the workbook and give the assignments, and then she'll talk a little bit from her experience about it. And she says it is just easier for me to have someone like talk it through in a way that I understand, right? And so this is the first time it's really clicking in a way that I think is helping me more. And plus, I'm a good audiobook person. So, but she said, she's like, the work in this book will accelerate you 1,000 years, like in terms of what your soul wants to grow. Because I believe, and she believes, and she teaches that we're here to perfect our loving. Like, we're not here to, like hoard wealth like a billionaire. We're here to perfect our loving. And like, so if you can get into a loving relationship with God of your understanding, that helps to and love other people, right? Because a lot of the teachings in it and the practice in it is like seeing through the eyes of God, and seeing through that in order to perceive other people. And that's just more loving, right? Like God, and like even with forgiveness, there's a whole lesson on forgiveness in somewhere in the 40s, maybe it was before, but like she was talking about like God never convicts you, because like that's not how God perceives. And so it's like a new a new lens to the world. And like I'm really grateful for it. And I'm grateful for all the people who teach from it, because I think it really is like there's like the Christ, right? Jesus the Christ, the person, has a weird fan club, but like look at actually like what the Christ did, on earth. And he said,
Right.
greater things than these shall ye do, right? Like, so like whatever's wanting to come through you in that Christ consciousness. And like, and it doesn't have to be some big thing where you get nailed to a cross. Like it can be like some gentle miracles that you facilitate just in your life wherever you're planted, and just being a blessing, and just like trusting in divine timing, and like all the lessons and patience you and I have both. um
Well, Jesus really, what he came here to do was he was a teacher and he taught us how to heal. And he was healing through, or he was teaching healing through understanding that healing is love. It's being the full expression of love. It's lovelessness is sin. Lovelessness is what causes pain. And of course, in miracles teaches that a miracle is just a change in perception.
yes.
And so when you're willing to see it, feel it, understand it, believe it differently, a miracle can take, come in and it gets rid of the lovelessness. And I had this moment this morning where I was really, because I knew we were going to talk about this today, where I really started to better understand salvation. And so, sin, the word sin really just means like missing the mark. And so I think that it is missing the mark and we're operating in lovelessness. If something happens, we haven't had that change in perception. So we're still seeing that other person is wrong. We're still, in a victim mentality. Something is being done to us. We're taking it personal. And what I downloaded and got was that forgiveness is the bridge to salvation. So when they talk about Jesus will forgive you of your sins and that's how you're saved, well, it's because forgiveness is truly just, seeing things from a perspective or an understanding of love, which should then lead to releasing that attachment to the thing, person, situation that you have, and it's returning back to pure love. So if lovelessness is sin, forgiveness is the act of returning back to pure love, to that pure way of thinking. And so forgiveness is the process of shedding lovelessness and loveless thoughts. And that is why forgiveness is the bridge to salvation. So if salvation is releasing that loveless thought and returning back to pure love, and forgiveness is the conduit to do that. And so I had this like moment of aha where I was like journaling this all down this morning. I was like, oh my God, suddenly it makes sense. Here I am like approaching 30 years old, and I am just now really like freaking understanding what salvation meant when it was taught to me all those years. And I think that somebody asked me one time, they said, when do you know you've truly forgiven? And I said, you no longer have an emotional response to the person, situation, whatever it is. And I don't mean that you can't look back on it with like some form of nostalgia and like be sad that the experience happened, but it doesn't still get you up in arms. You don't see the againstness that you first saw when the person, place, or situation first happened. That againstness, that lovelessness, those loveless thoughts no longer exist. And so I truly think that when you have truly forgiven a person or a situation, you no longer have an emotional response to it. And I think that is what the Bible means when it says you are free indeed.
Yes, absolutely. That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Dylan. I feel like that's a really good place to end the podcast today. But of course, you'll be back. Um, if you want to be, but you know.
I will be back anytime you want me. We'll just do our own podcast.
Yes, let's do it. Dylan, I love you so much. Thanks for being my friend and just being
Right back.
a shining example of just being you so heavily, and just shining God's love through everything you do.
Well, and the last thing I want to say is, you know, and you trigger this by what you just said. Anyone who's listening to this, I really want the takeaway from this conversation with me to be that the moment you are willing to truly tap into who you are authentically, stop telling even the little white lies to yourself that you think are keeping you safe, they're really just keeping you comfortable. The moment that you disregard all of that and you tell the raw gut truth about who you are, what you want, how you show up in the world, and how you want to show up in the world, you will tap into who you really are authentically. And that is the key that unlocks the door to your life.
Ah, brilliant. Thank you, Dylan. I love you
Love and
too.
light.